Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning into my channel here. I have made some updates a little bit and I'll go over that to start off here and just a little bit over the world itself there and for the series of getting started with Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically focused around Dungeon Masters, people jumping into it brand new. Kind of as far as the story time, maybe you are brand new to D&D. Maybe you're wanting to introduce your friends on how to play and you have no idea where to start. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to go buy a starter kit. Lost Mines of Phandelver is fantastic. I'd recommend that because it teaches you how to be a Dungeon Master and teaches your players how to play the game and helps set that up as well too. But for myself, I'm a huge advocate of the homebrew content. And that's one thing where I definitely wanted to go out there. There's amazing Dungeon Masters and YouTube content creators out there that do a great job at showing people how to go through and play, and also go through and show them how to be a Dungeon Master as well too. And you're going to hear me maybe quote a lot of things that they say as well too. I highly recommend when I kind of bring them up, go check out their channel if you want. You're going to get a lot from it there, and hopefully I can help you with that too, and at least show you step by step how I do things. For me, something that I always do to try and get better is when I'm educating other people or trying to show off how I do things, I might find some little tweaks here and there, or maybe help hone in on some of the skills that I'm focusing on to be able to help other people as well too. So hopefully you can take that and drive with it as well too. And for those of you that are starting by playing the game as well too, or maybe teaching somebody how to play, I highly encourage you to take that approach as well. So last time we were on, I went through and we created our little village, Asteria Village. On it, we went through and hit the key main points of it there. I highly recommend to go back and check to see how we started off with creating the village and then fleshing it out a little bit there. The first two videos of this series will go over that for you. It also goes over just the basic NPC names that I created, along with some of the details and the names and everything as well too for the village. One thing that I did do, since we were on last, is I went through and I just took a pin to all of the filled in names of things, and then I just took a colored pencil and then went ahead and colored in some of the rest of the finer aspects of it there. So as you're going to see, grass for the prairie land there. I made the buildings with the brown roofs as that point there, gray for the bridges, blue for water, used a darker green for the forest to kind of help contrast everything. Chances are your players may not see this, or they might, and they might think it's really cool that you've got these. And I've got just in my little I have this little container here that just has a ton of my different monsters and worlds and stuff in there, where I go through and use the same method to go and create villages and worlds for my players to go into. Help me be a DM on the go, more or less, and teach more people how to play with just about nothing. And when you have these cards, this just kind of gives you a sense of, oh, this is mine, and you can make some tweaks to it and you can kind of flesh it out and make it feel more like a real thing instead of just a slap together project at that point there. And reality is, and just like the other videos and me even coloring it in, you can get everything done within 30 minutes to an hour, probably even sooner than that, depending on how practiced you are, and if you're slowing down and showing step by step how to do things, that'll change a lot. So that's kind of what we went through. On the first step, I always recommend, start with your main setting, your village, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a ton of different quests and adventures and NPCs for the players to interact with in the world, starting right here. And this will be a nice little safe haven for them to go to as well. Now, one thing I definitely want to go over is for the next spot, and what we're going to focus on is, you're going to have NPCs to talk to. You're going to have, the world that's out there. What are you going to do in order to have more than just this one location? And how are you going to get your players quests? How are you going to get them experience points or loot, or at least start a story if you're really narrative driven at that point there? So what I recommend next is, after you've started with that hamlet, village, or town, like we did with Asteria Village here, you're going to want to have at least a dungeon to visit, and you can consider this like a one-shot adventure. Chances are the players may only visit it one time, and then be done with it. They'd be able to go in, and this can be like the starting adventure for them, or the starting pinnacle of their adventuring party together. And then I'd recommend having a dungeon to come back to, something that is like multi-adventure. And this, you can also have just the same one where maybe it's a one-shot adventure to get people started, and they'll keep coming back to that dungeon as well too as you expand and grow it. So That's not necessarily something where you have to have two, but I recommend slowly start accumulating dungeons and locations and some encounters that you can just throw out there and say, hey, I've got this one on the fly that I can throw my players at there. And you don't have to make it feel like you're railroading your players to say, oh, well, you're only going to go down this one path. There's nothing wrong with that on the very first session, but as you progress, having more of a sandboxed or open approach is really good for the players at that point there. And with each of those dungeons, I'd recommend to have a quest apiece, something that would draw or kind of use as a plot hook to get your players over there. So, for example here, we'll jump back over to my village. When the players are going to be exploring the village, they're going to eat some of the different NPCs. They're going to meet Edna over at her bakery. They're going to meet, the folks over the Territorial Raven. They're going to meet some of your random NPCs, or Grant over at his merchant goods stores at that point there. They may have quests for them to go on, and they may have little tidbits about things that are in the surrounding area that your players can go and do. One classic thing I always love to do from one of my starting adventures is I have my players save the blacksmith's son that got kidnapped by orcs and goblins, and they're planning on sacrificing the kid to their deity to gain more power and possibly other things that might be bigger into the actual overarching campaign. You don't have to necessarily go that route. I can go over that adventure there. I stole it straight from Matt Colville, so go check out his video on running the game and the very first adventure. It's fantastic. But if you're wanting to build one yourself here and use the tools, I'll kind of go with this for you as well too. So I'm going to go over, and I'm actually going to show you step by step how to create just a very basic dungeon for the one. What I'm going to show you here is the dungeon to come back to, or my multi-level. So I just drew this thing up in a quick little tidbit there. You'll see some of my artist, skills coming through. I'm no professional, and I whipped this up probably in about 10 to 15 minutes. So if you don't like it, go ahead and take more finite time to get it going there. But the reason I went with this is it's a multi-level adventure where people and players can come back to this. There's a few different aspects I'm going to go on this checklist for this one. I'll kind of go over with this one, so when we jump into the next one, you'll be able to see how I piece it together. The first thing you want to go with a local dungeon is, who made this place? So for this specific dungeon, and I write it on the back of the card, so that way it's nice little world building for my players. It was made by dwarves. So straight up there, you're going to imagine that this thing is actually built into a cliff or mountain face at that point there. It's got a little bit of an opening wall, and as you see, I just kind of wrote it so it's a little cracked and broken into. That's going to show signs of distress and signs that something went down here. But if you have a dwarven player in your group that loves, stonework, or somebody that knows history at that point, they can tell by, just this area that dwarves had made this. The other thing, too, is you want to know what the purpose of the place was. And for me, what I said was it was going to serve as a military training ground. So, made by dwarves, military training ground. It could be specifically for dwarves, or it could be for like a coalition of tons of different races at that point that maybe serve for a kingdom. You don't have to make all of your kingdoms or areas just one race. You definitely can if you want to. But there's the purpose of what this dungeon was. And the last question is, who lives here now? So chances are, if your dwarves or whoever it was that was using this place as military training grounds is not there, something happened and something else is living there now. So now in ruin, only the undead live here. So this is where you're already kind of starting to tweak your mind a little bit as far as, who made this place? We figured out the dwarves. What was his purpose? It was a military training ground. Who's living here now? Well, really nobody but the undead. You can kind of start piecing things together and try and make it out of it as well too, and help your characters also fill it out. You can use your character's backstory to kind of help flesh it out as well too. If you have some NPCs that you're going to make your evil faction, you can say, hey, these guys came through and they pillaged this place, or they killed everybody inside of it there. Or maybe the dwarves escaped maybe a beast that was inside this, and now you've got yourself a giant threat or an encounter in the dungeon itself there. And I just have it set with a little star there. After the players clear the dungeon, bandits may take over. And that's just going to give it more realism and kind of give them a little bit more that, hey, if they clear this place out and they don't stick anybody here to defend it afterwards, well, another group's going to come in and kind of take over and call it their home, because now all the undead baddies are out of there. So, and it gives them more of a reason to come back, so they're not always coming back to this and having to face the undead over and over and over again. They may face the undead the first time or two that they visit, and then they're now going against bandits with different tactics, different style, and different loot as well too. So with it going through, looking what the purpose was, that's when you can start thinking about the loot that might be hiding out in this place there. And I've got set up initial loot, just because once your players clear it out, well, the bandits are going to come in, they're probably going to have their own different kind of loot and maybe their own different stuff there, and they may not even have any loot. But for the initial loot, based on it being built by dwarves and a military training grounds there, and the undead's hanging out there, that means something went down, they probably left stuff behind. We've got gold, we've got weapons, armor, and a magic item. And I'm thinking like maybe a magic weapon or maybe magic armor, depending on what my players are. I'm not going to give a monk, a great sword, but I might give him a special staff. I'm not going to give a barbarian chain armor, but I might give a paladin that. So think about that when you're thinking about your loot there. Tie it into a little bit of what you're on this side and the kind of the background of the place and jump it over there. And then you'll see I have this numbered off. Now, what I highly recommend is when you're building a dungeon, you're going to have at least a couple dungeon features. For the smallest dungeon, I recommend. Now, what that is, those are things like hazards and obstacles, so like traps or places you have to climb or swim, or something that's going to be like kind of a physical roadblock for your players, or maybe something that could harm your players as well too. You're going to want to think about maybe some combat. So if there's undead in here, well, chances are they're probably undead military that have a bone to pick with whoever's stepping on the grounds there. So your players may have some different encounters that you can kind of fill in as a DM and make it random and say, hey, you know what, the barracks are going to have some undead, and maybe this room up here is going to have some undead. Or maybe even this one over here is going to be a staging place where they're going to be some undead for you to fight. So you can at least throw 1 to 2 different combat scenarios in there. I'd highly recommend, you don't have to have every dungeon has to have a puzzle, but I like to have puzzles in there as well too. So something for the players to find and discover and piece together, I think would be a great idea. And then finally, the one thing you're definitely going to want to have for a dungeon, even if it's not tied to a quest, maybe just like a random NPC, name drops, oh yeah, there's this old keep over in the forest that, you can go find. Their dwarves used to train there or something like that. But nobody's been there for a long time. I'm sure there's stuff left behind. Well, your players may decide, oh, well, forget any kind of quest attached to it. We want to go dungeon delve. We want to go find some loot. So you would definitely want to have like a treasure room or like a plot room where, your campaign or your adventure is going to kind of mainly take place, or like some kind of special encounter like a dragon lair, or maybe the lair of a giant beast that your players have to clear out or kill. So you want to have at least one of those there, and one of the other things to kind of help flesh out your dungeon. As you're going to see, I have some numbers on here. So what I did was I went ahead and threw a hazard and trap kind of right in the entranceway here. So where the number 1's at, I went ahead and just wrote on the back of the card there. There's a lever inside there. Look torch. It disarms the scythe trap going deeper. So that means that the players go through. You're going to notice another thing too. If the players go through this entrance there, if they're not being very aware and they say, it looks like just a normal room with some unlit torches and some barrels on the ground, or I can say, hey, some of these torches are lit, there's one that's not, to kind of give them a clue that, oh, something's up here, or maybe I should start looking at that item. And sorry if you're hearing like moving around, that's probably my 3-year-old upstairs. But that's a hazard or obstacle that the players could go through and get hurt by. Now, jumping over to what I was talking about too, where that number 2 is at, that's actually my other little feature that's put into this as well too. It's kind of a puzzle or a secret for the players to find, and on it, get written back on here, number 2, this room is filled with maps of the surrounding area worn down over time. A turn shield hangs on the wall, making it straight leads to a secret passage. So this is actually a second entrance or exit for the players to use. So as you're going through, you can go in either through the main entranceway, which is the most obvious route, or maybe you can have some other things. If the players decide to use their social interactions, ask around the village, ask maybe the captain of the guard, because, hey, they're military, maybe they know about this keep. They may reveal to them, oh yeah, there's this giant rock down there on the edge of the forest. If you follow the wall on that rock, you can actually find the secret passageway to get in and get out of the place without much issue. At that point, now you've got a secret passage that helps cut off most of the map. And you've got armory here, and you can decide where the loot's going to be, you can decide where the magic item's going to be, but now you've set yourself up with a just basic dungeon that you can put a lot of things in. And so if your players go through this way, you'll want to make a trap or at least a puzzle or some way for them to be like, oh, I've discovered this, probably through social interaction, and that can kind of count as your puzzle for it as well too. So the number 2 really should just be the secret passage here tied to this room. But in reality, you can go through and open things up either way. And so if your players just want a quick way to get out, well, they hit this room, they turn the shield, now they got a way out. That's pretty easy. They don't have to go through the entire thing again. Or they want to bypass most of the stuff that's going through here, be playing it smart a little bit and just try to loot and be stealthy. They can use that route as well too. And that's where you can kind of pepper in enemies. I personally would probably put like an undead captain in this room. So that way, regardless, if my players go through, they might fight a bunch of people here and then end up at the undead captain, just like normal adventurers might be. But if they're trying to think outside the box and do something a little bit different, they might use a secret passageway, end up in kind of the captain or the planning room at that point, and then now they're going to have to go up in the staging area against that undead captain and still have a battle, still give your players something on there to do, and then they can adventure it with the dungeon or they can leave when they feel like they've found what they needed to. So that's why I say, hey, your dungeon can be just a place to visit, or it can be a place to come back to. One other note I'm going to put on here as well too that you guys can see is I just put level 1 on there. If I ever want to go back, you know, as a DM, you don't have to make this the only time your players use it there. Chances are you're not going to show your players the map. You're going to be sitting there and saying, okay, well, you're going down, unless you're playing with minis and stuff along those lines, then they'll be able to see the map and, you know, your enemies. But if you're just playing, you know, Theater of the Mind like I usually do, you're going to be able to go through and say, hey, you know, you've disarmed the scythe trap. You enter in a hallway. There's 2 ways. You can go left or you can go right. And they're going to have to use their imagination. They may have to draw out their own personal map at that point. But you'll see that I have some different winding rooms, that there's not just one straight path back here. They have multiple locations or ways they can go, and that's going to help with the exploration of the dungeon itself there. So when you're building the dungeon, you can go through and think about multiple things as far as, oh, well, am I more worried about the journey of getting to the location, or am I more worried about once they get there, are they going to have enough to explore inside the dungeon? So this is a dungeon that you can go through and say, hey, your players are going to be searching around a ton. And then this is just a starting point. You can go through and say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and make maybe a lower level or maybe an upper level. Maybe my players have been searching through this place for quite a bit. Maybe a villager or somebody talked to them about, oh yeah, there's this secret passageway that is not the entrance, but actually can get you out of the place. So then you can come back to this dungeon and you can delve deeper and you can kind of keep building. So that's just kind of going through, again, just kind of like my checklist I like to go through is, you know, who made the place? What was its purpose? Who lives here or what lives here now? You know, how do you get in is definitely important at that point. I kind of left that one off. How big is it going to be? Is it going to be smaller? Is it going to be larger? Multiple rooms? You want to kind of figure that stuff out while you're kind of planning ahead there. You're going to have at least 2 dungeon features, so the hazards, obstacles, combat, puzzle, treasure room, plot room, or special encounter. And then one last little bit is each room should have kind of like a notable feature. So if your players are Theater of the Mind and they're looking through and they don't have a map in front of them, that's where they're going to use that to figure out, oh, we've been in this room before. So stay tuned for the next one. I'm going to go over how to build just a single one-time adventure next.